Hi guys, this is Bob Leonhard. This is the third video of a four-part series, and the general subject is politics and Christianity. So if you haven't watched the first two, go back and watch them. But today what we're going to talk about is politics and history, and specifically the history as it relates to the church. Okay, and so we're going to learn a couple key facts, key turning points in church history, and discuss and see how that affects our politics. So let's start. I want to introduce you to what I have come to call the fourth century paradigm shift. The fourth century paradigm shift. It simply goes like this. Something really big happened in 313 AD. Okay, it still affects your life today. It redirected the course of human history. It changed the church radically, completely changed the direction of the church, and ultimately it impacted on Christian doctrine, including baptism and how we do that, on ecclesiology, the way the church is organized. It affected eschatology, the doctrine of end times. And that incident was Emperor Constantine issuing what is called the Edict of Milan in 313 AD. This edict, relatively permanently stopped the persecution of Christians in the Roman Empire. Now, up to that point, there had been a couple previous emperors that kind of moved in that direction, but it never lasted until Constantine made it happen. Constantine is well known in history as sort of the first Christian Roman emperor. And when he issued this Edict of Milan, everything changed. Very quickly, the church changed direction, and the question we have to ask ourselves is, was that a good direction or a bad direction? And this kind of looks like this on the timeline. Jesus Christ died, we believe, in the year 32 AD and was resurrected and ascended. And then you have the apostolic period all the way up to about 100 AD with the Apostle John lived almost that long. And during this period, the New Testament was written and Christianity was persecuted by the Roman Empire. And so when you read the New Testament and you look to the New Testament for guidance, keep in mind that it was written in this context. Christianity being persecuted by the Roman Empire and by others. And then all of a sudden, in 313 AD, Constantine becomes a Christian and issues the Edict of Milan. And all of a sudden, everything changes. Okay? And now, ever since then, Christianity has been politicized, all the way down to today. Constantine, after he issued this edict, soon began to act very favorably toward the church, returning property that had been stolen from them. He began to promote Christians into official positions in the government, so that literally bishops that had scars on their hands from being tortured found themselves in charge of civil positions of authority. So it happened that fast. When his son, Constantine II, became emperor, by that time the church was so deeply involved in politics, the politics of the Roman Empire, that they began to factionalize, this part of the church backing this politician and that part of the church backing that politician, and pretty soon bloodshed followed. And then when you go a little further on the timeline, you get to emperors like Justinian I, who declared that every Roman born into the empire was automatically a Christian, and therefore would be baptized at birth as a baby, whether they wanted to be or not. They would just be sort of shanghaied into Christianity. Okay? You have to ask yourself, was that really what God wanted? So what happened after the 4th century paradigm shift? Well, after becoming promoted into civil power, the church started to become corrupt and rich, and they began to split into factions that hated each other. And then religious wars began to multiply as people who claimed to be Christians were killing each other in the name of Christ. And I ask you to stop and think about that from the New Testament position. Do you think that's what Jesus Christ wants, for you and me to kill each other over politics? Is that what we're about? Pagan rituals and money scams began to become part of the church experience, because we were building these big glorious churches and we needed money to do that, and so we started to play all kinds of games to get money out of people. Well, by the 16th century, the Reformation leaders, Luther and Calvin and others, tried to correct some of these bad ideas. But here's the key. They held on to the notion that Christians should govern the land and the people, and that the government had the duty of ensuring the obedience to the faith. And this is why John Calvin, for example, had Michael Severus put to death, beheaded because of a theological doctrinal point between them. That's the kind of stuff that was going on when Christians were in charge. They were killing each other in the name of Christ. But now let's go back to before the Edict of Milan, before the 4th century paradigm shift, and look at the politics of Jesus and Paul and Peter. Nowhere in the New Testament can we find any exhortation for believers to become involved in politics. Paul didn't talk to us about voting, and neither did Jesus. That just simply wasn't a reality back then. There was no opportunity and no calling for us to be involved in government policy. So if you want to be involved in politics today as a church-age Christian, then you're going to have to go somewhere else for your guidance, because you're not going to find it in the New Testament. Church tradition and historical precedent has to become foremost in your life, and it has to replace biblical authority if you want to be involved in Christian politicking. That's the only way you can support it, because you won't find anything in the Bible about it. And that's why when Christian leaders try to tell you to get involved in politics, they often go back to the Old Testament, because there are politics in the Old Testament, okay? And they're quoting prophets that had things to say about politics. But then they try to take what these Old Testament prophets were saying, and they try to import it into the church age, and that's not going to work, and I'll show you why in a minute. Some Christian leaders try to draw from the New Testament. They try to draw from the New Testament, and they talk about the idea that we're supposed to do good works, and we're supposed to do good to all men. But what they try to do is say, and the way we do good works is we're going to do it through the government, and that's why it's important to vote and give money to your political party and do all these other things. This is not right. We're not supposed to work through the government, because government is corrupt, and it's not Christian. It's not controlled by Christians. It doesn't, and even if it is controlled by Christians, it often becomes corrupt. What we're supposed to do is act through the church, not the government. Doesn't the Bible say that we should be striving for righteousness? Didn't John the Baptist get involved in politics? Wasn't that why he was beheaded? Well, my short answer to the first question is no. Church-age New Testament believers are not urged to fix society or the country of their birth. There's no hint of politics in the New Testament epistles. Instead, it is our job to work within the church and evangelize the world. We take the message of Christ to the unsaved. John the Baptist was able to get involved in politics and criticize Herod Antipas for adultery because as a prophet of Israel, he had the duty to represent a so-called Jewish king who was ruling Israel. Herod Antipas had violated the Mosaic law, and so John, as a good prophet of Israel, brought him to task on that, and that's why John was beheaded. But to understand the difference between what the Old Testament Bible prophets and the church today, how these two different things should function, we have to see how God thinks about the world, how he organizes the world. There are basically three groups from divine perspective. First of all, there's Israel. Israel is God's special possession. The rightful king of Israel is God himself. And therefore, the law of Moses that was given from God is the constitution of ancient Israel. It is the law of the land. Priests and prophets that you read about in the Old Testament had a duty to act as agents from God to correct the bad politics, the sinful politics that were going on in the nation of Israel. And that's why you often read about social justice and things like that in the Old Testament. The nations, on the other hand, all the non-Jewish nations of the world, including the United States, they're in a different category. They're not God's special possession. He's sovereign over all of it. But the nations are not his special possession. Right now, the devil, we're told in the New Testament, the devil is the ruler of the world right now. He's the prince of the power of the air. And his system is sinful and evil and corrupt. And it brings about war and pollution and racism and all kinds of sin. The law of Moses does not apply. Now, I know that for many that's very contentious because we like to think that 10 Commandments apply to everybody. But if you look at the Old Testament, if you start reading in Exodus 20, what you'll see is that the law of Moses was given to Israel, the people who God brought out of Egypt. It wasn't given to the nations. And it's not the law of the land. The law of Moses is not the law of the land in the United States. The Constitution is the law of the land. And the Constitution is explicitly neutral on matters of faith, according to the First Amendment. And then you have the third group, us, the church. We're told in the Bible that we are to be strangers and pilgrims and that we're waiting for a heavenly city. The Greek word is polis, from which we get politics. We're told that our citizenship is in heaven, not in America, but in heaven. All right? We're supposed to be kind of like insurgents in the devil's world, and we're waiting for our king who's coming. So isn't it our duty and our right to be involved in politics? That's a fair question that you might ask. Isn't it our duty and our right to be involved in politics? Well, yes, according to the Constitution of the United States and ancient Greek philosophy, the idea of being a dutiful citizen and, if you're a good citizen, you must vote. This idea, that comes from ancient Athens. That does not come from our Constitution. It comes from ancient Greece. So, yes, according to the Constitution, you have a duty and a right to be involved in politics. But no, according to the Bible. There's nothing in the Bible that tells you to be involved in any of that. Biblical Christianity demands a radical new allegiance to a kingdom that is invisible right now, that's coming later, a kingdom of Christ. And after that, to New Jerusalem that you read about in the last chapters of Revelation. In the meantime, we're supposed to be peaceful, obedient citizens focused on evangelizing the world and ministering to each other. The Bible does not justify patriotism, voting, politicking, or being part of a political party or any of that. But it also doesn't condemn that behavior. And I'm not saying that you can't do those things. It doesn't condemn that kind of behavior. It just doesn't justify it. Okay? And so I kind of look at it like drinking. Does the Bible say that you're not allowed to drink alcohol? No, it doesn't say that. You're allowed to drink alcohol, but not to excess. Because if you drink it to excess, you become drunk, and drunkenness is a sin. Same thing in politics. If you are so involved in politics that it begins to spoil your witness to other people, then you're drunk on politics, and that's sin. You need to repent. Next time we're going to talk about politics and eschatology, that is, the doctrine of the end times, and how the doctrine of the end times should affect our politics. All right? And we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.